Welcome to Wingspan Adventures and Flight. This is episode 2 of our series, Forgotten No More, Reviving the Mighty C-47. This episode's title is Honoring the Past, Building the Future. The Skytrain's revival begins. Today, we'll meet Jim Reeder, and we will take a close look at the aircraft itself and learn about Jim's plan. We will also learn about and honor this Skytrain's previous owner, Bill Dempsay.
Before we get started, if you haven't already watched the first episode of this series, Road to Restoration, the C-47 Skytrain's epic move to Ottawa, Kansas, then I'd recommend that you do. The link will be in the description, or you may see the card on your screen now.
Hello everybody, this is Nathan with Wingspan Adventures in Flight, and I'm here with Jim Reeder of Reeder Aviation LLC in Ottawa, Kansas, and behind us we have a C-47. And Jim's planning on restoring this thing, right?
Well, our hope is to restore it to flying condition. So, good afternoon, and thanks for listening today. Nathan's last video that he made was the day we moved this from Rantoul, Kansas, over here to the Ottawa Airport, distance of about 9 or 10 miles. And we do hope to get it flying. Right now, we're sort of surveying and inspecting and looking for corrosions and things that we're going to have to repair. But our goal at this point is to get it airworthy. So,
have you seen anything on it that really stands out that's going to be a major problem yet, Jim?
Well, not yet. There are some corrosion spots that we found, a little bit on one wing. We're getting ready to inspect the other wing. And of course, there's going to be mountains of work to do. We just are hoping not to find something we can't fix. And so by checking first for corrosion, we're hoping to not find that. And so if you walk over here and just take a peek inside, we've got the floorboards up. We just did this last week, and we were wanting to, we were hoping we weren't going to just find filth down here along with a lot of corrosion. And we were just very pleasantly surprised with what we found. It's really clean down here. There's a business at the south end of the airport, Dodson International, and they own a salvage company that's also over at Rantoul, and they've been a great help so far with the know-how and helping us to get it moved. So I'd like to give a special thanks to Dodson Aviation and their people that when we have a question, and I have lots of them, they're a great group to go to and ask. And so
fantastic. So that's over at Rantoul where we started on the move in the last video.
That's where the salvage yard is, but they also have a facility on the south end of this airport where they work on jets and things that are flying in and out. I think mostly their own, but they used to have a deal where they did turbine conversions to DC-3s and C-47s, and so they have a lot of experience working on this type of aircraft. So,
oh, great. That's awesome to have them right down there. You can ask them a question anytime.
But when I was a youngster, Bill Dempsay, the family who owned the guy that owned the farm where this airplane came from, was a crop duster and a sprayer, and later on moved to bigger aircraft and had a contract with the Forestry Service to fight forest fires. And so even today, there are 3 of the big DC-4s still sitting there in the conveyor. And of course, this aircraft was sitting over there, but he sort of rescued this aircraft. This particular serial number, this aircraft, was either in the United States Air Force or the Spanish Air Force up until around 1978. We don't have all the aircraft's history, but we're working on it as we go along here. And we know that at one point it served in United Nations aircraft. The tops of the wings still, you can still see that even though the paint's been stripped off. It sort of etched itself into the wing along with its insignia. And so at some point, the aircraft was bought by Warren Basler from Oshkosh, and they do the turbine conversions. And so the aircraft was flown from Florida in the mid-'80s to Oshkosh, Wisconsin. And they found enough corrosion that at that point in time, they had better candidates to invest money in and do the conversions on. So this aircraft, like the famous That's All Brother DC-3 that was recently restored, ended up kind of on their back row. And so my friend Bill Dempsay, who owned the farm over there, found it there and bought it from him, really to kind of rescue it from being
Okay.
salvaged. And so he got it flyable and flew it to his other facility in Tucson, Arizona. He liked warm weather, and so in the wintertime here, he would go out there and work on airplanes, so it stayed at Tucson for at Marina Airport, the same airport where I think even today there are several DC-4s, and I think the first Columbine, maybe the first Air Force One Constellation, or maybe it was a DC-4. Anyway, it was at the same airport, and eventually he flew it back here to Rantoul, Kansas, I think around 1992.
Okay.
And so it hasn't flown since then, although he used to, after he retired from the Forestry Service, he restored and worked on aircraft, fixed them and that sort of thing. And so he would go out and start the engines on this each year, along with the other aircraft that were functional there. So it's been run as recently as probably 6 or 7 years ago.
Okay.
But not flown since 1992. So
Are the engines are free then? You can spin them?
engines are free. You can spin them. I don't have any reason to think that they won't start and be okay. Really, our priority right now is just to make sure there's not some horrible corrosion issue that we can't reasonably fix.
Right.
And so another thing that Bill did is he was kind of a fabric guy. People would call him and say, hey, I need ailerons or elevators for my C-47. Well, he would already have a pair covered, so he would put them in his truck or on top of his truck and drive across the country and switch them out, and then he'd bring back their old ones, just do kind of a core type deal, or exchange, I guess you call it.
Yeah.
So it turns out that he had all the control surfaces and a few extra in the airplane here, recovered, and they're now leaning against the wall in the hangar.
Okay.
So when it comes to putting on the control surfaces, that's a step that hopefully we won't have to take and recover them.
Oh, that's awesome.
So
yeah. So that's really interesting.
The wing that's in the hangar, we were able to put a bore scope in and ensure that it doesn't have any horrible corrosion issues. And so our next step when we clean up the belly of this and put the floor back down will be to take the interior plastic and the insulation off so that we can inspect that part of the aircraft too.
Yeah.
So one of the things that people constantly ask me is, they'll say, what are the differences between a DC-3 and a C-47? And of course, I'm learning. I'm learning constantly. But so the DC-3 was designed by the Douglas Aircraft Company in the mid-30s, and it stands for Douglas Commercial Number 3. And they began. It was the first airliner that could haul passengers for airlines at a profit without having to be subsidized by something like the U.S. Mail. Outside of World War II, the military started getting all of them, and the military designation is C-47. So it's the same airplane with a few changes. So some of the things that C-47s had, some of the differences are that, for example, C-47s had this double cargo door where DC-3s would have just had a smaller oval door that folded down and had stair steps to get in as a passenger lane. But this big double door was built to be big enough to use forklifts and put cargo in, or you can even get an Army Jeep would drive in there. And as these doors closed, when in flight, the back one would always be shut, and the front one would be shut, but there's an inset here that comes out from the inside, and if they were going to drop Army paratroopers, they would jump out through that door. So when you see pictures of C-47s, for example, during D-Day, the invasion or something, jumping out in a line with their static line attached to their parachute, so as soon as they jump out, it opens up. This would be how that would work. C-47s also had a stronger metal floor, and so there are attach points in this floor to attach cargo to and secure it. There are attachments to put a sort of a track on the floor to steer pallets that are kind of on rollers. There are even attachments, I was just told by someone who knows way more about this than I do, to put the paratrooper seating or benches down each side. And so that all would have happened with this floor in here. A DC-3 that just was built for passenger transport, I think, had a wooden floor, but it was a much lighter floor either way. You can kind of see with the camera here the belly or the interior that we've exposed by taking the floor plates up, and we're really happy with the condition of that part of the aircraft so far.
No major corrosion in there.
No, another difference of the thing about a C-47 that DC-3 did not have is on the tail, there was a setup to be able to pull or tow gliders. As you know, during the Normandy invasion, they would tow gliders along the route. And so C-47s had a stronger hard point to do that with than DC-3s would have had. Another interesting thing that I just learned about through the process of getting ready to transport it is this little door that's on the vertical dorsal fin. Kind of see two screws that turn, or quarter turn screws, and that door opens. That's a lift point, so you can lift the tail. So we had to open that door and lift the tail up to back the trailer underneath the tail to be able to transport it over here. And I was just surprised that when you open the door, it's not just a metal lift hook, it's actually a piece of braided cable about a foot long that comes out with an eyelet on the end. And I've been told that all DC-3s and C-47s had that right from the back.
Wow. So yeah, that's how you guys lifted it up and put it in the on the trailer to move it in the last video.
Another thing C-47s had is up there on the top, and it's removed and just covered with a plate right now, but we'll get one, and that's a celestial navigation dome. And so the military would use that, or could use that, as a way to navigate with the stars using a sextant. And so we bought one off eBay that was new from the Air Force, still wrapped up in their packaging, and it was advertised as a C-47 Celestial Dome, but when we got it, it was much bigger. So it's for some other type of World War II aircraft. So we're still looking for if you follow me over here, something I think that it's just amazing. I really noticed it until you just stand still and start looking, but if you just kind of stop somewhere and start looking, you'll start seeing little patches. And they're just literally, in this aircraft's over 80 years of existence, they've had to patch here, and they've put a patch here, and there's a patch right there, and there's a patch right up there. And if you look at that square one, it's just really neat and looks really well done. And so as you look at one patch to the next, you can kind of see that some of them, they took more time to make some of them look really nice, or maybe the person doing it was more skilled. There's a patch right here. If you look right here, there's a patch on this cowling up there, another one over there, a third square one kind of above it. And if you just stand long enough and look, you can just about find one patch after the next on the whole airframe. And it just kind of makes you wonder what all things the airplane has been through, if it could talk and tell stories, that caused all of these patches to be put on. But they're everywhere. So it's just something I thought was pretty interesting.
Yeah, that is pretty interesting.
These engines are Pratt & Whitney 14-cylinder, 1,200 horsepower engines with Hamilton standard hydromatic propellers. So the DC-3s or DC-3s at least could have also come with a Wright 1820 engine, and probably C-47s also. We want to know that there's not some really bad corrosion similar that we can't fix.
It looks pretty good in here too, at the wing stems.
Yeah, there are some corrosion issues. This piece right here has got a piece of corrosion right here. See, I stick my finger right through it. And so we'll work on that and find out how far it goes. And I've been told by someone who knows more than I do that a person can patch that up to a point, unless it just goes too far. But we have to find out how far the soft rotted metal goes. And that same place on the other side, so it has the same type of situation.
So apparently that was a spot that was gonna corrode because
around the engine angles. So see, here's that same piece, and it's got a little spot right here. The engine nasals area, we're dealing with exhaust fumes, heat from the engines, gas and oil, and who knows what goes into the, the concoction that causes the corrosion to be worse. But it is worse, I've been told, around the engine nasals and where the wheels go up behind the engine. So there are some. This is where we're looking extra carefully, and I've also been told that, and we haven't looked in there yet, but if you look up here, the hydraulic cylinder, these are the two cylinders that work for the gear to come up and down. The very top one up there, it has an attach point that goes kind of back through you can kind of see I'm not sure about your camera angle, but it's a piece of canvas with a square hole on that bulkhead the canvas normally covers. And part of the attachment for that hydraulic cylinder extends back in there. I've been told that place is sort of notorious for collecting stuff and moisture, and then and not having any way to get out, and then you end up with corrosion there. So we hope we don't find that there. Taking off? All right, I'm glad you came down this morning. Good to see you. We'll see you later. In case you had a fire, there's a fire suppressant system. And another thing that's different than most smaller aircraft, who have, when you have a control cable, it usually goes through a sheath. And when they get old, they can start working hard to pull in and out. These older airplanes like this, all of the engine controls have cables that are just bare. They just go around a pulley. So you can feel and you can oil and feel the cables and lubricate the pulleys and inspect them, but there's no sheath to really get tight. So, it's a good thing in a way. So each one of the control, the throttle and the mixture and the governor for the propeller, things like that, all use two cables, one for each direction. So the muffler's here for the engine, all the exhaust comes out right here on this engine. But the shroud goes around the tailpipe here, the muffler, and air for the heating system goes in here. It blows around the outside of the muffler or the tailpipe. I'm not even sure if it's got a muffler in it. Maybe it should be probably just a tailpipe. And then it's directed through a ductwork across the top of the engine nasal, through the center section, and inside the cabin and the cockpit for heat. You can kind of see that white duct, and there's also one in the other engine. So that's how they get cabin and cockpit heat, is through that.
So if there was an exhaust leak over here, that would be a major problem.
It could be. Well, small aircraft, you have the same thing. You inspect the shroud around the muffler, because that's how they get heat too. Bigger aircraft, like most modern twins, they have a furnace that burns gas, just like your furnace in your house. But this is the way this one did it. And I think you could get a gas-fired furnace to put in if it was an airliner and carried people. I think they had that, but this one doesn't. So
Interesting.
DC-3s had green brakes. C-47s had these big disc brakes. So this is a brake disc, sort of like your car wheel would have. It's just much bigger and thicker. And then this is the brake caliper with 4 pistons. So I don't know if that was a heavier duty system than the other kind or for what reason, but I've been told that C-47s have this type of brake. Make sure when you're working on an aircraft engine that the magnetos are off or that they're grounded so that they can't accidentally fire if you turn a propeller. So they put magneto switches on the DC-3s and C-47s on the ceiling in the cockpit, right in the middle. If this window's shut, I can't really see it, but if the window were open or cleaner and shut, you can see the levers on the magnetos, and when they're off, the levers both stick down, and a person down here, like you or I, if we were going to work on this airplane, we could look up there and ensure that the magnetos are off or grounded. before we touch the engine without having to climb up inside the aircraft to go check that way.
What do you think about taking the viewer up to the cockpit?
Let's do it. I think it's a great idea. These two tubes that stick down are for airspeed. So both sides of the cockpit, pilot and co-pilot, have their own airspeed. Can I hold that for you when you get up here, or are you okay? All right. All right. So on most of these, the room in the back would have been the restroom. Kind of back that direction. And again, as you can see, as we walk up through here, some entity that had this, one of the owners, plugged off every other window for some reason. So we'll end up putting those back in. But the belly so far, the underside of beneath the floor here, seems really clean. This ductwork right here is part of that same heat system I was telling you about. So the air comes in from both engines through the midsection inside the wing, and then into this area here where it can be deflected either up into the cabin floor here or on up into the cockpit. And a lot of different configurations too. Some DC-3s, rather than a stack of radio gear here, would actually have a radio navigator's position. It'd be a desk with a chair and a light, and it would just be their station. I've been told that a lot of DC-3s, C-47s that are still flying today, this part's open, and sometimes they'll put a galley, a little place there to fix a meal or something. I've also been told that in the early days passenger travel, that the little door that's just behind me here, and you'll see it in a minute, that they would climb up the airlines and throw the luggage into this area and also over in this area if it were a passenger carrying plane. I've also been told that this door is referred to in the industry as the hamburger door, because if you open it while the engine's running, the propellers are right there. Oh, jeez. So I might get out of the way and let you step up there. There's a little more room, and you can see in the cockpit. The radios that were in there, we still have. They're in a file cabinet over at Bill's shop. They just pull out of those boxes, and of course, we're going to put some updated radios and avionics in here. But
so where's the magneto switches that you had?
the center on the ceiling? You can see.
Oh, these right here?
Right there. So if they're in the off position, notice they're both down.
Mm-hmm.
And to turn them on or ground them, you have to turn them sideways. So anyone on the ground should be able to see that they're off in that position. I'm going to open this window.
Oh, that feels nice.
There's an escape hatch here on the ceiling. And of course, if you look here, each of the panels have different switches that, primers for the engines, and the starting switches, they're actually on that side. But these red knobs are the feathering buttons for the left and right engine. Should you have to shut it down in flight, you'd want to feather the propellers or turn them edgewise so that they have less drag for the aircraft. It's pretty simple by today's standards. Behind you, there is kind of at your back, Nathan, is a bank of levers and hydraulic valves. And I don't know if you can see it with the camera, but this glass, little sight glass tube, it shows you how much hydraulic fluid you have. Here's a place to add hydraulic fluid to the reservoir. And then you have a hydraulic lever down here for the landing gear, one for the flaps. Over here are controls for the cowl flaps. They also are driven by hydraulics. And believe it or not, these two gauges on the right side of the cockpit are for the hydraulic pressures. And they, I know, kind of look like they came from an antique steam locomotive, but they are original equipment for this aircraft.
U.S. Gauge Company, New York.
They look like they came off of an old boiler or something.
Mm-hmm.
But
Made in the USA. You don't see that a lot anymore.
And below your feet down there is the big long lever is the hand pump for the hydraulics. If should the engine-driven hydraulic pump fail, you could use that lever to pump the gear down, or put the flaps down. Or the flaps.
They really had a lot of redundancy in the system in case of hydraulic failure or something.
I'm sure the camera with the lighting we have here will be able to see. But if you look down here, you can just see how many cables there are, and they all, the bigger cables control things like the elevators and ailerons and rudder, and the smaller ones are for things like the rudder and elevator and aileron trim tabs. And some of these go back and turn and go through the midsection of the wing and then back out to the engine to control things like the throttle and the mixture, propeller governor.
Sophisticated technology. When we say fly by wire these days, we're not talking about cables like that.
Wire, yeah. These are some of the hard points on the floor I was talking about earlier. These pieces here are for passenger seats. The passenger seat, you take a screwdriver and turn this about a quarter of a turn, and this little hole gets just a tiny bit bigger so that the passenger seat feet can slide down in there, and then when you turn it back, it kind of locks it into place. Some of these other points, like right by your left toe, is just a tie-down point. These buckles like this. This one, you can cinch cargo down with straps. And I think these are the ones that the guy was telling me, another mechanic, way more experienced than I am, said that those were for the benches that paratroopers would have used. It's just a long metal bench with sort of seat pans for each person, each trooper. You can see here at some point in its life, it had seating, and there are lights and little just accommodations that I think the exit signs and things that at some point, as being used in some capacity, it was for carrying people, and we don't have all of the airplane's history yet. Sink and probably a mirror to freshen yourself up with, but inside this door here is another area, and I don't know if you have enough lighting for the camera to see, but some of these are control cables that go up to the elevators and the rudder, and that long post that you see going up and down is actually the mast for the tail wheel. That coned area underneath is a hollow spot, and the tail wheel is right below that. So there's a mechanism at the bottom of this mast that locks the tail wheel straight. So before takeoff, there's a lever in the cockpit controlled by this cable, and it pulls the lock out of it, or it either puts it in place and locks the tail wheel, or it unlocks it. I read a story about the most people ever carried by one of these aircraft, and they were originally, as a passenger liner, were designed to carry, I think, 25 people, give or take a couple, depending on the seating arrangement. But I guess at the end of the Vietnam War, when people were scrambling to leave Saigon and the American embassy, one of the last planes that took off was a C-47, and people just scrambled on and packed it, and some of them even climbed back into this area. But I guess there were over 100 people on the airplane when it left, so. Worth talking about, but this is original equipment and how it put up with 80 years of use. You can kind of see a patch right here, somewhere along the line, somebody patched it, but these light duty little aluminum ladders that fit in here are not so light duty after all. They've been around as long as the airplane has. You set it in here on the floor before you go, and that's how that works. About the people, the family I was able to get the airplane from. So Bill Dempsay, who owned the business, Central Air Service and D&D Aircraft. He sprayed and fought forest fires for the Forestry Service and had this aircraft along with many, many others. But he died about 2 years ago, and his two children, his son and daughter, who live in California, are in the process of selling his aircraft and things. And I made them the offer on this aircraft with the idea of trying to save it and keep it in one piece and hopefully get it flying again. I know that's why their dad had bought it from Basler's, was to try to save it. So I guess that's what we're kind of trying to do now. But they had offers for the engines and the control surfaces and several different items, and they actually sold it to us for a little less than those altogether would have added up to, because they loved the airplane too, and the idea that maybe we could save it either as a flying aircraft or a static display. So this is the right wing, and the wings are held on to a DC-3 or C-47 with all these little bolts. About over 300 bolts, I think, close to 350 for each wing. And so there are these small bolts that carry the whole load. And of course, inside you can see the ribs and the spars and the inner construction of the wing. I like to look down the top of the wing at these hundreds and hundreds of rivets, all put in by hand by a Rosie the Riveter during World War II.
Thousands of them.
Yeah, there are quite a few videos on YouTube where you can see these wings being built. I don't know if you can see it on your camera, but this wing here says Nations. You can see the ONS right here, and it starts back there. So whenever it was flying for the United Nations, this would have been painted on top of the wing.
Oh, I can see it. I don't know if the camera's picking it up.
Well, the one that's outside will probably be easier because the lighting is different. I want to show you real quickly over here. Bill Dempsay,
Oh, you can see it in the camera.
good.
Yeah. Let's go.
He liked to work and install fabric on aircraft and control surfaces. So these are elevators, and I'm told that they're interchangeable, that the left and right can be used on either side. So
They look to be in excellent
well,
condition.
they've never been installed, and we're hoping that since they were inside the aircraft where the ultraviolet rays of the sun couldn't deteriorate them, we're hoping that they'll still be good. We'll have to inspect inside and that sort of thing. One of these ribs goes right between the fuselage and each wing as it bolts on. And then these control surfaces here, of course, ailerons. And yeah, so it sounds like a drum. It's just a fabric covered piece. Something Bill told me, kind of interesting, not the DC-3, but the next model newer, the DC-4, which was a 4-engine, much bigger airplane, and there are 3 of those still at Bill's farm over at Rantoul. But they also have fabric covered control surfaces on them, and of course by that time they could easily have made them be metal covered. But Bill said the reason they continued to have fabric covered control surfaces on the DC-4s during the war was to save the lady's job in the sewing room. So whether he was teasing me or that's the truth, he did tell me that. If you want to come over here and look at the other wing, because there is some corrosion we found. So you've got, most airplanes have 2 spars. The DC-3 had 3. And this is what you call the lower cap of the spar. This is the spar webbing in between the upper cap and the lower cap. But there's corrosion here. I don't know if you can see that, but it's kind of boiling up there a little bit. And also right here. And so the other lower spark gap on this side doesn't have it, but this one does. And so when we inspect this wing, we hope it doesn't continue too deeply in there, and it doesn't appear that it does. But this is a common problem and something that happened in this type of aircraft. It's when the, I guess what caused it was when the aluminum extrusion was made, they didn't get all the impurities out of the aluminum. So it sort of caused it to later kind of rot from within. And I've also heard that some of that can be aggravated or maybe even caused by the quenching process. After it's made, I guess the oven opens and it drops directly into a liquid. And if they don't time that right, I think that can cause that, or at least make it worse. So again, I'm learning about this as I go. But we're going to have to make that repair. But on this wing, so you can see the stenciling on the top a lot easier. You can climb one up here if you want to. But so this in here says United right across here. This is the left wing. So not United Airlines, but United Nations. And then here is the United Nations logo. It's sort of a world with the graph, and there are several continents, and then sort of wreaths of leaves on each side. So, and a nice, interesting patch right there, by the way.
I can distinctively see the logo in the video, so that's good.
And if you can kind of see the leaves along this side of it anyway, and or a wreath, whatever it is. But if you Google search United Nations DC-3s, you'll find pictures of that type of. And this right here is a lifting hook area. So if you're going to pick the wing up on a DC-3, they're already provided with screw holes there. Right here, there are 2 more, and then 2 here, and 2 down there. And so that's where you attach your lift hooks to pick the wing up and have it balance and not damage anything. One of the people who helped me get into aviation and fly and become a pilot and a mechanic. That picture is probably 15 or 20 years old. And so he's sitting in the cockpit of a DC-4. As a matter of fact, when that picture was taken, if you look over here, he got one of the DC-4s up and flying again, and a company in England bought it to make a movie about the Berlin airlift. And so he had left Rantoul and flown over to Coffee County Airport at Burlington, Kansas, and stopped for gas. And this is the Burlington County Airport, or excuse me, the Coffee County Airport. And I see a law enforcement officer was there and was pretending to cuff him up. But this was Bill. He was quite a character. But he also excellent pilot and experienced, and he flew this across the Atlantic Ocean to England for the movie.
Oh, wow.
Which he made many Atlantic crossings during the days that Dodson Aviation used to do the turbine conversions on DC-3s. They would get them from the South African Air Force, and Bill would fly them across the ocean, put extra fuel inside the cargo area, and fly them over here. So did that many, many times. This is an old photo of one of the DC-4s dropping fire retardant. You see a good picture of that?
Yeah, that looks good.
Incredible. And there are always all sorts of stories that you hear about Bill. His nickname was Wild Bill Dempsay.